I found the slight, possibly over-sophistication of a slightly more filmic, more visual way in which Kirsch told his story a little bit excessive for me, for my taste. For me, this film is about friendship and loyalty and trust and self-identification, but don't take it too seriously. Let's have a laugh about it, but when we're going to cry, let's cry. And when we're going to laugh, let's laugh. And I think that's what I guess I brought to this movie, and I like to think that's why I was asked to direct it.
George Lucas was not liked by Hollywood after the release of Empire Strikes Back. For years, he did interviews stating how out of touch the Hollywood system was.
It's a fact of kind of resentment, I guess, that everyone feels when one finds that somebody who has the money, or as a result of the money, has the power to make decisions that are out of their area, But because they have the power and because they have the money, they can make like aesthetic, directorial, writing decisions, which they have really no business making.
After such statements, he financed his own sequel, Walking the Edge of Ruin, as he broke free of a system that profited off talent and used politics to control films. When Alan Ladd Jr. left Fox because of those political problems, Lucas felt he had no allies in that studio for multiple reasons. When Empire was struggling financially, after going over budget and over schedule, Fox just stood by and offered no help. Rather, the studio waited, hoping it would crash so they could take over the production. Whenever Lucas made licensing agreements on anything from the first film, which Fox technically owned, the studio would drag its feet with agreements or contracts, making the whole process filled with bureaucracy and unnecessary time, which wasted potential profits. Finally, when Empire was released, Fox put little effort in the marketing of the film internationally. Later, analysts would claim that this alone cost Lucasfilm and Fox over $100 million in ticket sales. But that wasn't the end of it. The Directors Guild tried to argue that in Empire Strikes Back, the Lucasfilm logo, which was a company name, was touting Lucas's name over the director in the credit reveals, which was completely ridiculous. The Guild also complained that there was no starting credits at the beginning of the film, which was not fair to the cast and crew. Lucas stood his ground to keep his title crawl, and in an effort to extort Lucas, they tried to fine him $250,000 for the decision. Lucas went to court, and in the end, the Guild could not punish Lucas because of technicalities. Instead, they punished director Irvin Kershner by fining him $25,000 for not adhering to the standard beginning credit practice. Lucas paid those fees, and even worse, the Guild would continue to pester Lucas for years, until finally in 2011, over 20 years later, Lucas was vindicated. The moment Lucas paid Kirsch's fees, the Writer Guild caught the scent of blood in the water, so they went after Lucas too. Why not? It was embarrassing and typical of the exploitive Hollywood system. Lucas, not wanting to subsidize any of these organizations, officially left the Directors Guild on January 8, 1981. This created its own problems because now that Lucas left the Guild, any director that would work with him might have a target on their back for working with an adversary of the Guild. The only person powerful enough that didn't need to worry about it was Lucas's buddy, Steven Spielberg. For this reason, Kirsch was not really pursued for Jedi, especially when Kirsch had already been attacked by the wolves. Even if he had been offered the job, Kirsch wouldn't have taken it because he wanted to move on. The legalities of working with Fox continued for at least a year. When Charles Weber left Lucasfilm, new Lucasfilm president Robert Greber came in and didn't want to play games with Fox anymore. During February 1981, there was a deal on the table and Fox sat on it. Greber, impatient, went to Fox and said, "Are you accepting our distribution deal or not?" And Fox said, "No." Greber's response was, "Well, if that's the case, all negotiations are off. There is no offer. Goodbye." Then Greber waited for 3 months before contacting Fox again. On May 18th, an offer was sent, which had a production, finance, and distribution agreement for Return of the Jedi, if ownership of the first Star Wars movie was returned to Lucasfilm. At that time, Fox owned Star Wars, but had no control on the sequels, and Lucas wanted his first film back. In July 1981, Fox wanted the rights to make a Star Wars television show, or rights to remake Star Wars, and that if Return of the Jedi was the last film, then Fox could have the right to make sequels to continue the franchise. Lucas was against all of these, and once again, negotiations dried up. Then Fox was purchased by a billionaire named Marvin Davis, changing everything all over again. During September 1981, a letter was sent to Fox stating that Lucasfilm would invoke its first refusal right, which meant that if an agreement wasn't made in 30 days between Fox and Lucasfilm, then Lucas would go distribute the film through another studio. Then Fox complained about the TV video holdback, which basically stated that Star Wars sequels could not be distributed on video or be sold to television stations until May 1986. Fox worried that once Return of the Jedi ended, people would let go of Star Wars and forget about it, thus lowering its value by the time May 1986 arrived. They wanted to release it sooner so they could make more money before it was too late. To get things moving, Lucas lowered the holdback date for Star Wars sequels, and after hours of sitting in a meeting with lawyers and heads at Fox, a handshake deal was finally made. On December 4th, 1981, and it was 224 pages of legal jargon. Amidst all these tedious legalities, Lucasfilm moved forward, uncertain who would direct and what kind of fallout would befall anyone working on the film. At Lucasfilm, Ralph McQuarrie, Joe Johnston, Nilo Jodis-Ramero, and Stuart Freeborn got to work on concepts for the film like Jabba, monsters, and locales, while Lucas worked on the script. On February 24th, 1981, a rough draft summary was finished. The crawl for the summary states there are 2 Death Stars under construction and that the rebels must move quickly or perish. Then Darth Vader would arrive on Had Abaddon, the capital city of the Empire. He meets up with Grand Moff Jerjerrod, and the two go to a lava chamber where the Emperor waits on a throne. The Emperor tells Vader that Luke must be killed, and Vader states they can turn him, but the Emperor, impatient, chokes Vader. Vader then leaves obediently. Meanwhile, Princess Leia leads a team of rebels infiltrating a moon like Endor, orbiting the capital city planet. We then cut to Luke sending the droids to Jabba's palace when Lando and Chewie arrive. Luke tells Lando and Chewie to follow the droids, and states that he senses Han is out of his carbonite. Their goal is to draw Jabba out of the palace so he can deal with Jabba and his minions, because as long as Jabba is in his palace, he's too well protected. Most of Jabba's palace plays out like the movie without Leia, except that Han is bearded and in a cell when Lando and Chewie are captured. Then Luke arrives, he fights the Rancor, makes Jabba mad, and the crime lord sends them to the pit of Carkoon, where they get free. Then we cut back to Leia and her commando team, who are trying to not only disable the communications for the Death Stars, but their shields as well, so the fleet can attack. To do this, there are 2 huge guns that will knock them out. A nice surprise in this script is that General Veers from Empire Strikes Back returned. He leads a group of Imperials on rocket bikes and walkers, and he discovers Leia's ship. He slaughters many rebels near the craft. Piett reports this to Vader, and the Sith telepathically contacts Luke, stating that the rebel infiltration group is in trouble and that he can help Luke. Then we find Luke on Dagobah, where he learns he has a sister, and it is Leia. Back at the fleet, General Madine tells everyone the situation, and Luke arrives. We then return to Leia, and she realizes that Imperials are disguised as rebels near her ship to trap her and any remaining rebels that they didn't get. Leia escapes by using a rocket bike. She gets away, but is then ensnared by a primitive net. Hilariously, we discover another stolen plot point by Disney when Luke and Han lightspeed into a planet's atmosphere to avoid detection to help Leia. Leia meets Wicket and she heads to the Ewok village, where Han and Luke will meet up with her. The Ewoks then join the rebellion. A thing to note is that throughout this draft, Ben and Yoda continue to speak to Luke through the Force, and around this time, Ben tells Luke that he must destroy his father or join him. Ben states he can limit Vader's Force use in the Nether, and that he does have the ability to take corporeal form if he chooses, but now is not the time. Luke then surrenders to Veers, and he is taken to Vader. Jar Jarrod angrily arrives on Vader's Star Destroyer, demanding that Luke be taken to the Emperor, and Vader kills the Moff by physically choking him with his bare hands. Vader then takes Luke to the Emperor, and the fleet attacks while the team on the Forest Moon take out the shields. While taking Luke to the Emperor, Ben appears before them, and he pleads to Vader to turn back from the dark side. Luke supports Ben's appeals, and then Ben states that if Vader continues down the dark side, his identity will be snuffed out of existence. Vader states he does not fear death. When Luke comes to the Emperor, he tries to goad him into killing Vader, but then the ghosts of Yoda and Ben appear, startling the Emperor. Yoda states that there are many others in the Nether, but anyone on the dark side will never know of it. The Emperor demands Vader kill Luke, and they begin dueling. The Emperor taunts Vader for being weak. Vader then tells his son to finish it, but Luke says he will not kill his father. Luke then extinguishes his saber, and Luke is hit by lightning. Vader then charges the Emperor, and both sink into the lava around them. At the end of the draft, there is a celebration, and Ben appears, but he is not a ghost. He appears in the flesh, and with him, from the Nether, is Anakin and Yoda. Luke hugs his physical father, and Yoda says, "A reason for celebration it is." With a starting draft in hand and staff working on concepts, producer Howard Kazanjian and Lucas went to London on March 1981, not only to oversee the scoring of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but to explore director options. While there, they decided to check out some of the English directors. It was then that Richard Marquand heard that they were scouting around, and he arranged a meeting to try out for the job. The meeting went well, and that was that. At the time, there were many directors being considered, even some that were part of the Directors Guild in America. Names like Richard Donner, Desmond Davis, Terry Gilliam, Stephen Frears, Tony Scott, Joe Dante, Richard Lester, Richard Attenborough, John Carpenter, David Lynch, and William Fraker were all thought about. In April, George had whittled the prospects down to a few names and was going to do an extensive interview himself with a few, and Marquand was one of them. Marquand came to Lucas's house and would spend the day with George and his wife. Marcia cooked dinner for them, while Lucas gauged how well they communicated and learned about the director, and how he viewed Star Wars itself. If any director hinted that they saw Star Wars as just a kid's film, it would have been a failed interview, according to George at that time, which was ironic because later he would say,
it's hard for people to realize, and I'm not supposed to say this, and I wasn't supposed to say it then, but, it's a film for 12-year-olds.
He then took Marquand to ILM to see the current process and discuss the film. Marquand left enthusiastic, but knew he hadn't won the job yet. When he got home, he sat waiting, and out of boredom, Marquand called Irvin Kershner about Lucas and his methodology. Kersh said, "Lucas will leave you alone, more than any producer you've ever worked with." On April 28, 1981, Kazanjian relayed to Lucas that they shouldn't consider any directors tied to the Guild because there's a good chance they could be blacklisted due to politics. This was a plus for Marquand. Lucas also interviewed David Lynch, who remembered that he wasn't that enthusiastic about doing a Star Wars film. Lynch recalled that he had a headache when he met George, and when he saw pictures of Ewoks, his headache got worse. By lunch, they went to a restaurant that only served salad, and Lynch said, "Then I got really kind of like a migraine headache, and I could hardly wait to get home." Marquand, on the other hand, wanted the job badly. He took his wife and went towards Lucas's headquarters. He called Lucas and asked if he could have 15 minutes, and Lucas admitted to Marquand that it was between him and another director, which was Lynch. Marquand left hopeful, but unbeknownst to Marquand, Lucas picked Lynch. Now accounts vary on what happened next. Kazanjian and Lucas stated that they offered Lynch the role and stated Lynch was thrilled. Then 3 days later, he backed out and announced he was doing Dune with Dino De Laurentiis. Lynch said that never happened.
Even before I got home, I kind of crawled into a phone booth and phoned my agent. I said, there's no way, I know no way I can do this. He said, David, calm down. You don't have to do this. And so George, bless his heart, I told him on the phone the next day that he should direct it. It's his film. He invented everything about it. And I had next door to zero interest.
Comfortable with Marquand, they hired him, and in celebration, Marquand drank 2 bottles of champagne. In May 1981, the art department was moving along well, but Mcquarrie was not enthusiastic about the Ewok part of the film. This was also the take of Jodis-Ramero, who challenged Lucas to keep the Ewoks out of the fight by keeping them in the trees above while the rebels slugged it out with the Imperials below. Later, he stated, I just didn't think that they belonged in this story. I thought it would be more layered if they were not involved, but I was completely wrong. On June 12, 1981, a revised rough draft was completed, but Lucas asked Lawrence Kasdan to take over the script to help flesh out the movie. Lucas was generous and collaborative with everyone. Marquand totally oversaw storyboards for the barge battle and the Endor fight. While working with Nilo Jodis-Ramero on this, Marquand really liked what he was doing. Nilo had drawn many costumes that impressed the director. Richard then asked Lucas, why don't we have Nilo do costume design? To which Lucas said, you're asking me to not use John Molo, who won an Oscar for me. You're asking me to replace John with Nilo, who's never done costumes before. Richard stood his ground and asked George to give him a try. Lucas just looked at Nilo and said, you've got 2 weeks to prove it. And prove it he did. He landed the job as costume designer for the film, thanks to Lucas's openness. The actors were not so lucky with their collaborative attempts, though. Mark Hamill requested that Luke get a girlfriend in the film since Leia was with Han. He also wanted to turn to the dark side, and then turned back at the end of the film. When Harrison Ford signed for the next film, he was a huge star now thanks to not only the Star Wars films, but Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he was a bit upset because in Japan, the poster for Raiders had the director and producer's name on it, but not his. Still, it is famously known that Ford also wanted Han to die, but Lucas denied all of these requests, and I think rightfully so, as the trilogy ended with memorable catharsis. The only person that was partially listened to was Carrie Fisher, who stated that she wanted Leia to be more feminine, as she thought the character was too bitchy in Empire. She even went so far as to say Leia has lost everything, her planet, everyone she knows, Han, and she's been hunted for years, and maybe she's just exhausted and wants to give up at this point in the third film. Though they didn't go that far, they did make her less combative in comparison to Empire. When all was said and done, both Hamill and Ford were disappointed in the script. Mark thought it was a letdown, while Ford referred to the film as a teddy bear picnic. The most frustrated of the cast was Carrie Fisher. She stated she was too feminized and that she felt like a Barbie doll throughout the film, saying that she loves you and letting her hair down. The thing that killed me about this setup was, okay, you put me in this bathing suit, but then I have to stop talking from the here on. Strip me and I'm silent. I am defiant with everyone else. Tarkin, Darth Vader, but this slug really shuts me up. Any defiance I had in the other movies, all gone. On September 14th, 1981, Kasdan turned in his first draft screenplay. The screenplay had a lot of things similar to the final film, except the dialogue was extended or different in many places. One such example is where Ben tells Luke that Owen is his brother. The script had some unique scenes with C-3PO, where Chewbacca would be tortured in front of the droid. Another scene had 3PO trying to translate an argument between Ifant Man and Reyes, which would be ground zero for a physical altercation between the two monsters. With Kasdan's script in hand, Lucas rewrote the work by changing dialogue and adding a few things. Then he would turn it back to Kasdan to get feedback before it came back to him. Within time, it became the final script we know today. Kasdan would finish his final draft December 1st, 1981. Like they did with Empire, fake scripts were made to contain leaks, and one person in mind was David Prowse, who had leaked a lot of information in Empire and became a security risk. In all scripts given out, Leia being Luke's sister and the death of Darth was omitted. By December, the casting was finishing up. The role of the Emperor was considered for Ben Kingsley, but then Alan Webb got the part. However, Webb got ill, and then Ian McDiarmid got the part. Another interesting candidate was Alan Rickman, who auditioned for Moff Jerjerrod, but he lost to Michael Pennington. Kenny Baker was originally to play Wicket the Ewok, but when he grew ill, they changed the character to Warwick Davis. Instead, Kenny played Paplu. Principal photography began on January 11, 1982, and within a week of filming, Lucas concluded that he needed to stay at the set in Europe rather than return to the States, where Skywalker Ranch was being constructed. What Lucas feared most was going over budget and getting behind again. He did not want what happened on Empire to happen on this film. Even producer Howard Kazanjian wanted Lucas to stay because he was nervous about Marquand. Unlike Irvin Kershner, Marquand was not used to doing big Hollywood films, and he knew little of special effects. His inexperience showed often because most of the crew on Jedi had been with Lucas since 1977, and it was a well-oiled machine by now. Often people would go to Lucas with questions instinctually, and Marquand was aware of this. I just said, "Look, George, if I am going to do this properly, you've got to give me your time. I mean," he hadn't necessarily planned to be in London at the shoot, but I said, "You've got to be there. I like my producer around, and you're more than the producer. You wrote this goddamn thing, so let's get it right." Within a month, issues were starting to dawn, and there were many different views on Marquand. Some sources state that Lucas shadow-directed the movie, but by all accounts, this is often over-exaggerated. Now, there were times Lucas would alter scenes and film some himself, like the Admiral Ackbar scene in the command briefing, but this was because of his knowledge of effects. Most of the time, George constantly tried to allow Marquand to have ownership. Despite this, Lucas had to look over Marquand's shoulder because he was just not experienced enough for this kind of film. Lucas tried his best to make Marquand feel and look like the guiding voice of the film. Often, Lucas would say to Marquand, "Hey, you're the director," and then he would walk away, leaving the decisions for Marquand. However, Marquand knew Lucas was vastly more knowledgeable about technical things and mostly catered to George's desires when he chimed in. But the crew was mixed on Marquand. Mark Hamill liked Marquand's directing style, as there was less takes because Marquand was not as detail-orientated as Irvin Kershner, and he didn't like to take his time. Co-producer Robert Watts said, "George came and he never left. Richard couldn't grasp it, and George was concerned, so he never left. I wish Richard had come to me for help. He never did. The first day of shooting, I went into his office before we went on the set, and I said, 'Don't forget, Richard, we're all here to help you.' But it's quite possible he felt too vulnerable." At times, Marquand would confide to Norman Reynolds, who stated he was intimidated by George. Carrie Fisher, as always, was blunt. "I hated him. He fell all over Harrison, but he would yell at me constantly." Visual effects artist Kit West stated, "George was on his shoulder the whole time, and Richard, many times, had to save face and sort of put his foot down a bit because he saw himself as, the director." By the end of the shoot, Fisher would avoid Marquand as much as she could after their bad vibes came to a clash too many times. One time, she was required to shoot a weapon while running up a hill, but she wasn't doing it well. Marquand simply said, "Darling, you're fucking up my shot." I burst into tears. It was just one of those kinds of giant scenes. So, then that took like a half hour to redo my makeup. David Prowse was also very frustrated on the set of Jedi. Although he stated he liked Marquand when the film came out, he would later change his tune and say, "I was never allowed to get close to him. He wouldn't talk to me." Prowse stated that he would get all dressed up as Darth and sit around for hours waiting only to find out that Marquand used his stunt double instead for things he thought he should have done. After a while of this, David went to the stunt double and asked him what was going on. The double said he was asked to show up for a scene where Darth Vader throws the Emperor off a balcony, and Dave held his tongue. After a full week of hearing the shoot was failing, Dave decided it was time for a confrontation. He went to Marquand on Friday at the end of the week and asked, "Just what are you trying to do?" Marquand told him they couldn't get the scene working, and Prowse said, "It's easy. Just lift him up without wires and throw him off." Marquand, stumped, said, "You can do that?" To which Prowse said, "Well, of course I could. I wouldn't be the British heavyweight weightlifting champion for nothing, you know." The next day of shooting, Prowse did it in one take, after a week was wasted not utilizing his talent. Even more drama continued between our favorite two droids. Rumor had it that Kenny Baker and Anthony Daniels hated each other. Baker was from the circus and film, while Daniels was from the stage. At the start of 1977, Daniels would try to talk direction with Kenny to give nuance to their performance, but he quickly learned that Kenny had no script because he merely took body direction for the R2 unit. It was then that he treated Kenny like he was a prop rather than an actor, and Kenny took offense because he was more experienced than Daniels. This was Kenny's fourth film, while Star Wars was Anthony's first. From there, it just escalated and never stopped. Daniels thinks he was the greatest gift to George Lucas, and I was merely a nobody who operated a robot's controls and didn't contribute anything from an acting perspective. I myself hired Kenny Baker to appear in a comic show I ran in Nashville during the weekend of November 3rd, 2000 in Bellevue Mall. I spent a lot of time with Kenny, and while I owned my own business, I also wrote movie reviews for a newspaper, so as a journalist, I interviewed him as much as I could. Whenever he mentioned Anthony, I could see Kenny's genuine offense because his eyes reacted to the name, and he stated flatly that Anthony treated him like shit.
The last time I spoke to him was in Boston, and he was in front of me. I said, "You have a nice weekend, Tony?" He said, "I'm having a conversation," and walked away. He wasn't talking to anybody. Ooh, what could have hit him? If I'd have been as big as you, I'd have hit him. Yeah, I was furious. I was shaking with rage. I really was, and I'm not easily upset.
It's almost comic, the fact that C-3PO and R2-D2 in real life
I know.
don't get on. I mean, it's almost...
ridiculous, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It really is.
It really is, you're right. So let's forget about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pain in the
Let's
arse.
not dwell.
Kenny told me a story of the two standing on Jabba's sail barge waiting for the next shot. Kenny was out of the R2 unit while Anthony stood next to him. He asked, "Do you think they will do more of these? And if they do, will we be back?" He said Daniels didn't even look at him and coldly stated, "I will. I doubt you will." And not another word was said. Now, Kenny told me this story at a soft time of worry for him. New radio-controlled R2s were being made for Episode 2, and Kenny believed he wasn't needed anymore. He told me that while he had dinner with George, the subject of Episode 2 was brought up, and Kenny asked him, "I suppose you won't need me for that one, will you?" George replied exactly how you would expect if you are familiar with the character references of the man. "Of course we will. R2-D2 is always Kenny Baker." George Lucas then smiled, and Kenny slapped his hand on the table and said, "In that case, let's have another drink." In our weekend talking together, he told me tons of tales, and about a half hour of it was about Anthony. His long-term partner, Valerie Gale, would often steer the subject away from Anthony because it frustrated Kenny so. I gotta go off on a tangent and say Val was just awesome. I loved her so. We joked around a lot, and she was a lot of fun and smiles. A perfect balance for Kenny. Whenever I watch Willow or Elizabeth, I get a big smile on my face when I see her. I suppose a day will come when I will cover Willow, but it won't be any time this year. Despite the feuds the film finished, goodbyes were made, but post-production began. During a visit from Atari president Ray Kassar, the game makers were stunned by some of the computer graphics that were done at Lucasfilm. They asked if the company would make games for them. Robert Greber thought it was a great idea and went to Lucas. "Why don't I hit them up for a lot of money? Enough money that we don't have to spend a penny." and will use the money that they give us to build a team that will do games for them, but for other people as well, and we'll have a base for making games. So thanks to Return of the Jedi, Lucasarts was born, the creators of some of my favorite games, until Disney destroyed that fantastic part of Lucasfilm. Now, it is well known that the original title of Return of the Jedi was Revenge of the Jedi, and the name was changed because Jedi are not supposed to take revenge. What is not as widely discussed is how frustrating it was for the licensing for the film products. By December 1982, M&M, Hi-C, Procter & Gamble, and Kenner were among the licensees signed. Kenner especially was deep in designing and producing future inventories. The name change for the film was announced in December, and Lucas didn't want any product released with the old name. As a result, Kenner would have to destroy $250,000 worth of Revenge of the Jedi packaging and reprint them as Return of the Jedi. Some final things are important to cover is the after effect Jedi had on David Prowse and Marcia Lucas. When Sebastian Shaw came into the film, it was very secretive as to who he would be. According to David Prowse, he was told about it by a reporter, and he said he looked at the call sheet, and that was how he discovered he would not be the person under the mask at the end of the movie. Now, I highly suggest you check out the documentary, I Am Your Father, which is easily found on YouTube for full details. One thing that really shadowed Prowse was that during the production of Empire Strikes Back, he was considered a security risk for leaking material about that film. Prowse couldn't seem to avoid the label during Jedi. During a convention, Prowse was asked a question about a child cast in the upcoming finale. Prowse then mentioned the name Ewok, and the official fan club quickly had questions about these secret creatures before the movie came out. Prowse was lucky Lucas was tolerant because a breach of contract and elimination of participation for Prowse was mentioned regarding that event. This would continue when the Daily Mail reached out to Prowse to comment on the rumor which revealed that Darth Vader takes off his mask and dies in Jedi. After the article released, Lucasfilm had enough with Prowse.
No matter what I said, George wouldn't believe me. If he had only thought about the situation, he would have soon realized that it wasn't me who was giving information, or more likely selling it, to the press.
His agent was sent a letter by Lucasfilm lawyers stating that if he didn't stop, he would be in breach of contract. After Jedi came out, Prowse stated he was not paid in full, creating more contention. Now, there are some news articles that suggest Lucas hired Sebastian Shaw to punish Prowse because of all this stuff, but that is just poor journalism. Everything I mentioned concerning tensions on Jedi in this video happened after Shaw was cast, so it's simply not true. George wanted Anakin to appear much older than David, and others were involved in that decision as well. Producer Robert Watts stated,
"Personally, I didn't want Dave to know what we were doing because he had a tendency sometimes to talk to the press, which wasn't okay for this particular revelation."
Unfortunately, Prowse and Lucasfilm would never recover. Prowse remained very vocal about many of his negative experiences with his treatment, and in 2010, Lucas banned Prowse from official Star Wars events forever. Prowse had this to say about the banning. "After inquiring, the only thing I have been told is that I have burnt too many bridges between Lucasfilm and myself. No other reasons given." The tragedy of this is that in 2015, the writer of the Daily Mail that implicated Prowse as the leak for Darth Vader's death cleared him. The author of the article was Paul Donovan, and he stated the leaker was a technician or an extra. His editor ordered him to get with Prowse to give a confirmation or denial to the story that they would run. Prowse said he didn't know anything about it, but since Prowse's name was in the article, he got the full blame from Lucasfilm due to his past reputation of leaking things.
If it is true that George Lucas or his colleagues have penalised Dave Prowse for a leak for which he was not responsible, that clearly is an injustice, and if Lucas has done that, then he should apologise. Because Dave Prowse never told us anything.
David Prowse would die, never being vindicated by Lucasfilm.
It's a sad way for the whole thing for me to end, and I'm still, and to this day, I'm still suffering from the wrath of Lucas over that, whatever was happening on episode 3.
It was during the post-production process that George was struggling with another person, and it was way more personal. He received a request for divorce from his wife, Marcia, and Lucas stated, "I was destroyed because I had no idea. It just came out of the blue." Unfortunately, this quote from the making of Return of the Jedi by J.W. Rinzler is not entirely true, because in 1982, Marcia asked for a divorce, and the two agreed that they would do so after the release of Return of the Jedi in 1983. Marcia was frustrated with Lucas's workaholic nature, and she began an affair with a stained glass artist named Tom Rodriguez, whom she married in 1983. When Marcia divorced Lucas, she gave up all rights to Lucasfilm and was given a $50 million settlement. Now, many familiar with Marcia Lucas state that she has been systematically erased from Star Wars by Lucas as time went on. It is even suggested that the special edition changes were made to the classic films in an effort to differ the movies enough so she no longer receives any royalties. Whether this is true or not, I do not know. In the years after, Lucas and Marcia did not go out of their way to talk about the other, thus not irritating the scars of the past. Fans are actually the ones bringing it up, with one side saying Lucas is a hack, and Marcia saved Star Wars, or was a secret weapon that was the heart of it all. Other sides, like Paul Hirsch, claim he saved it, with barely any help from the other editors. Lucasfilm documentaries say Lucas saved it, because he's a genius. I cover this intrigue in our Star Wars retrospective, so if you care about my view on it, it is there. I would also recommend the documentary Icons Unearthed, Star Wars, for further depth on this subject. Regardless, following Jedi, George planned to do Indiana Jones 2, and his melancholy from this period of his life definitely affected the mood of that film. Whatever you think of George Lucas, it needs to be mentioned that he lived Star Wars for 8 years and could have little else in his life except Raiders of the Lost Ark, Lucasfilm, and what little time he had for his marriage. He was truly consumed, and after Return of the Jedi, fans made him out to be this legendary filmmaker who they idolized. By the 90s, he was revered and on a pedestal, and I remember this as I grew up as a teen in the years when Star Wars was considered over. We all talked about him as this mythical person, and then we became adults and lived as our lives called us to. But in 1995, Star Wars seemed to bud again. The Zahn trilogy was released in 93, and merchandise was now flowing everywhere, and not only kids were grabbing the stuff, but us young adults as well. I tell you all this because Lucas had an image, and the truth is the guy is just like the rest of us, with mistakes, faults, abilities, and gifts. People judge Lucas all over the internet, whether good or bad, citing the exclusion of Marcia Lucas, David Prowse, and Gary Kurtz as proof that he holds grudges and is a hack who is trying to get all the credit. Others say what they did in the 90s, that he is a maverick visionary. This is something for you to decide, because our opinion would just be another among many. The full information is at your fingertips if you are watching this video. Just look up more and dive into the rabbit hole of viewpoints.
We're just fanatics out here waiting on Return of the Jedi. 3 years in the making. We're waiting for this.
Some people don't idolize Darth Vader like I do. See, I want him to get Luke.
I guess Darth Vader will die. I'm not sure. I hope he doesn't. I love his black.
It's almost midnight and the countdown is on here at the Esquire Theater because at 12:01 a.m. Wednesday morning, the first official showing of The Return of the Jedi rolls onto the big screen.
Please have your ticket ready. Going in now for immediate main floor and balcony seating. Hold your own ticket as you enter the theater, please. Move it.
In May 1983, the box office was littered with a variety of content. Currently, the reigning champion was Roy Scheider in Blue Thunder, which came out the same day as Breathless. The week before the release of the most anticipated film of the year saw Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, and Tough Enough, trying to cash in before it would be overshadowed by Return of the Jedi on May 25th, 1983. It dominated the box office, breaking records that would not be matched for over 30 years. Jedi would consistently stay number one for weeks to come. Films like the fantastic Psycho 2, War Games, and one of my beloved comedies, Trading Places, including James Bond Octopussy, could not beat it out of the top spot. Only Superman 3 could beat it during the week of June 17th through the 23rd. However, following the reviews of that film, it quickly lost the following week to Star Wars, and Jedi would remain number one till the second week in July. No doubt the merchandising would keep Jedi on the minds of the public wherever they went. On May 27th, Burger King once again offered 4 collector cups. If you went to the grocery store, you could find the new Pepperidge Farm cookies with chocolate, vanilla, and peanut butter flavors. In July, if you went to your local mall, which was a huge pastime around this time, you might be lucky enough to see a Jedi Adventure Center, which was nothing more than pictures and information promoting the film. Let's not forget the arcades, where the new Atari Star Wars game was released just before the film.
Grid 5, I'm going in.
A new Death Star game for the Atari home system was made as well. Then there was all the standard products we were used to: bed sheets, curtains, lunch boxes, novels, activity books, coloring books, pop-up books, shirts, shampoos, soap bars, bowls, erasers, soundtrack, backpacks, masks, sticker albums for stickers. Let's not forget the Darth Vader speaker telephone. There was a variety of model kits as well. Topps ushered out 132 trading cards with a whopping 33 stickers, which meant if you wanted a set, you most likely had to buy a complete box to get it. If you were a real completist, though, the 33 stickers had 2 color borders each. So if you wanted to get all of them, that meant there were 66 stickers to obtain, 1 to a pack. You would be lucky to get a complete set with 3 full boxes. This card line would later be followed up by a second series of trading cards, which I actually preferred, as there were less cards to get and more obscure pictures that let you explore the film, its locales, and personalities. New Ewok plushies were also made, and these plushies were actually a fight for Lucas to get made because he wanted a Star Wars plushie for his daughter, and Kenner said that the toy market had so many teddy bears it might be a risky venture. However, Lucas was adamant and Kenner caved. The plushies were not wonderful quality and were rushed. There was even a Parker Brothers Battle Over the Sarlacc board game, which was pretty awesome. Yet the real thing we kids salivated for was the new figures, and it was the biggest rollout ever, with 17 new figures along with guns, lightsabers, and a bandolier strap.
Target and other stores in the area predict the toys will rake in millions of dollars. The movie has just been out for 2 days, but the kids are already asking Mama for 2, 3, and even more characters.
Which one of the Star Wars figures is your favorite?
Darth Vader.
Why?
Because he talks and he goes...
Victor Solis, Channel 5 Action News, Dallas.
When Jedi came out, I was elated because Star Wars was my best connection to other kids, as I was awkward, timid, and shy. When the movie was new, everyone was celebrating it, and I fit in perfectly during such moments. I instinctually knew the movie was the end, and so I met it with bittersweet feelings. My family just moved into low-income apartments called Foxbourne just across the street from Southwick Mall in Toledo, Ohio. I remember going to Montgomery Ward to stare at the figures for hours. Who wanted a television when this was your view? Since we had no money to see the movie, I entered a drawing contest at my church, and one lucky winner would get to see a PG or G movie of their choice. To my surprise, I won and was taxied to see the movie at Showcase Cinemas in early July. As a child, the movie ended perfect in my eyes. Luke was my idol at these times because my youth was filled with violence due to adults around me giving into substance abuse. I would often hide in my closet, playing with my toys to avoid it. I wanted so much to be like Luke, and took the themes of Star Wars very seriously since 1977. I tried to have a serious mind that was not clouded by selfish outlooks and emotional panic. This is why it was so sad to see Luke end his story, because as a young 11-year-old, I didn't know who I would look up to in the future. For any young person or teen growing up with the films at the time, although the Ewoks were popular, many adults at the time frowned upon them as an obvious gimmick by Lucas, and it would be years before most of us young folk realized this as well. Some adults in the media were stating that Star Wars dumbed down audiences, while Siskel and Ebert defended the film.
But why do you feel they are so bad? These films try to keep stupid children forever, and that I think is wrong.
And I would say not that I'm childlike, but that he is old at heart.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Simon ought to do what I did over the weekend. I went to a regular movie theater in a shopping center in Michigan City, Indiana, and I sat amid all the kids. There was one tall head and a lot of small heads.
Were they dumber than they needed to be?
No, they weren't dumber, to quote that interesting phrase. They were ecstatic. They were enjoying it, and they were rooting. They were asking each other who's who. They were getting all involved. They were rooting for the right guys and booing the bad guys. I thought it was a lot of fun. I feel badly, honestly, that this other critic, John Simon, didn't have a good time at these pictures. That's too bad for him.
When the movie starts, the incomplete Death Star casts a looming presence that must be dealt with. It's a great mood to start the film with because we all know what such a thing is capable of. The Imperial Shuttle, for some reason, is my favorite vehicle in every Star Wars film ever made. Its gracefulness and sounds just appeal to me for reasons I can't quantify. Out of all the classic films, visually, I think Jedi is the most interesting, especially in Jabba's palace because it's just a sensory overload of costumes, harkening back to the first Star Wars cantina. Another nice touch is that the Empire is depicted efficient and competent because even Vader's shuttle cannot approach without proper codes. This builds more threat and tension of the Empire, however, once Endor begins, it is quickly dismantled, which is unfortunate. I love that they show a TIE bomber Easter egg right here as the shuttle lands. Jerjerrod is no Tarkin. In fact, he is portrayed as cowardly and easily controlled by his superiors, a fact which would be concreted by a final deleted scene where he is ordered to blow up Endor with the Death Star. It's pretty obvious the Emperor didn't want a Moff who thought for himself running the second Death Star. It is really something how Jerjerrod was supposed to be a competitor of Vader for the Emperor's attention in early drafts, and now he's just a cowardly tool. For our first deleted scene, Luke would be found building his lightsaber, and I'm actually glad this was never in the film, as we didn't need to see it. Nor did we need to see Darth mentally trying to communicate with Luke. Starting off on the droids walking to the palace was a perfect transition from Darth and Jerjerrod. Now when the droids enter the palace, look closely as the door closes. You can see the original inhabitants of the fortress moving around behind the droids. These spider-like droids are called Bomar monks, who transplant their brains into droid bodies to live forever. Classic EU went into great depth about these monks, but I won't go into detail about them because we're talking about what's in the film and not EU concepts. I will say that there is so much packed into Jabba's palace, and it is a playground of depth when you dig into the character studies and politics within Jabba's fortress. If you ever decide to check out the expanded universe material pertaining to Star Wars, I highly suggest after you check out the Thrawn trilogy, check out books and material about Jabba's palace, and make sure it is Legacy EU, not the Disney stuff. There is tons of details and cool stories that really fit with the characters seen in the film, and a lot of alien performances match the EU stories. Moving on, when EV-99 calls R2 a feisty droid because he is giving attitude, it's very odd she does not put a restraining bolt on the droid. She does order 3PO to get one, though.
Guard, this protocol droid might be useful. Fit him with a restraining bolt and take him back up to His Excellency's main audience chamber.
But we never see a restraining bolt on R2. We can't argue that maybe he got one and removed it. What is also a very big convenience is that R2 somehow is set up as a bartender for Jabba's sail barge later in the film. What if R2 was assigned maintenance somewhere in the bowels of the fortress and couldn't go anywhere else? Sure is lucky R2 was assigned to the barge. We can also argue this away with our own fan head canon, but the film doesn't address these types of things, and that is when the cracks start to form in this grand plan to free Han. It requires that everything happen the way Luke desires, and it is clockwork. We will go into this more later. Now, I will be pointing out a lot of little things about this palace, and some will seem inconsequential, but I just love doing it, so let's start off with this droid here. Clearly, EV-99 has a torture fetish, as you can see dismembered R2 units and droids throughout the droid evaluation room. This droid, CZ-4, is a secretarial droid that was dismantled as punishment. However, it will be put back together and seen here after Luke kills the Rancor. Can you imagine being torn apart and repaired as punishment?
I couldn't think of a more horrible job if I wanted to. And you have to do it.
Besides Bespin and Hoth, Jabba's palace is my favorite locale in all of Star Wars. It is just eye candy of characters and costumes, and all the creatures look like they belong and fit in the universe perfectly. Some of my favorites is Amanaman, Ifant Mon, and of course Jabba. As you can guess, I like unique, non-standard designs for my aliens, although the Gamorrean guards, Bib Fortuna, Clatonians, Niktos, and Baratas are cool too.
Klaatu, Barada, that's it.
Jabba was an amazing design, and he looks fantastic. He has not dated a day, and is just a perfect design for the crime lord. Hats off to the makers of this puppet. It is amazing. At the beginning, we see Jabba smoking his hookah and spice, and the thing about Jabba is that we later see other Hutts in Lucas's Star Wars, and what most don't know is that Jabba is just a drugged-up slob, and that is why he is colored the way he is and drooling. He is really unhealthy as well, and most in the palace are just waiting or plotting to kill him, so they can grab his power. What you see in the film is that Jabba has an open room with many denizens. Some of them want to kill him, and others police him like Boba Fett and the Gamorreans to keep him safe. Jabba wants all his loyalists to sleep in the same room as him, because there are so many plotting to kill him, he doesn't know who to trust. There are informants everywhere as well. So Jabba is clearly paranoid. The movie shows this, and although the movie doesn't spell it out, once you discover these basic politics, it makes complete sense why the environment is the way it is, and it really works. Now, in 1983, there was a music video for Loppy Nick for MTV. The video actually started with Yarna introducing the band and then joining in the dance. Okay, it's time we go into the special edition for Return of the Jedi, and all I have to say is no. This is embarrassing compared to what came before. It is the worst special edition adjustment to all the films. I felt this way the first time I saw it, and I feel that way today. Sorry. To be fair, I didn't mind the introduction of Rapper Tooney, or even the Rhodian, Doda Badanawido, playing his slitherhorn, and yes, I think I pronounced it right. The drummers Akrev and Upis Stay were fine, I guess, and being the completest nerd that I was back in the day, I have these figures. However, the music number is awful, and the dancers are kind of silly, even though, it's true, I have those figures too. Joe Yowza is just cringy, though, and I've got that figure. God help me. I was an uncurable Star Wars collector before Disney. Thank you for breaking me of my vice, Disney. In the end, given the choice of Jedi rocks for these characters to exist, or choosing the old version, there is no debate. Give me the original, and I can leave the rest. Oola really had no way out of her miserable life, but yet again, this is a convenience, because had Oola not died, what would Jabba have done with Leia? I'm surprised he didn't torture her to death for ruining his favorite wall decoration. Then there is the reunion of Han and Leia, and even as a kid I wondered why she took her helmet off without subterfuge and then lifted Han up while leaving her disguise on the floor. Wouldn't she need the helmet to get out of here? But then if you think about the logic of the film, the goal must have been for her to unfreeze him and get captured. Nothing more. Some alien concepts never made it into the film. One was Light Man. He was a strange monster test, and originally he was supposed to walk Luke to Jabba. During tests, it was laughed at on set, so the idea was abandoned quickly. Supposedly, this was to be a lava-type alien, but it never got finished. Supposedly, Light Man was filmed, as you can see in this picture, when Luke and Han are judged by Jabba. However, he is not in the film as it stands today. Now, when Luke falls into the Rancor pit, there is a real nice nod to Empire Strikes Back. Apparently, the bounty hunter Dengar, seen in Empire, hated Han Solo so much he had to come see him, and here he is. In some of the unused footage for the Rancor pit, Luke and the Gamorrean were posed to have a showdown before the Rancor was revealed. Luke would then jump to the grating, but Jawas would hit his hands, causing him to land on the eye of the Rancor before hitting the ground. A section of the Rancor's head with an eye was built, but it did not make it into the final film. This scene was well known to kids like myself who collected the Topps First Series trading cards in 1983. During the scene where Jabba sentences the heroes to death, neither Han or Luke says anything about Leia, and this frustrated Carrie Fisher in real life. She felt her character was totally forgotten about at this point. Fisher joked about the scene later. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." Fisher stated that filming this very scene was the moment she realized she wanted to be a writer. On the way to the Pit of Carkoon, there was a deleted scene where C-3PO tried to translate for Reese and Yak Face. The translation didn't work well, and the two got into a fight because of it. You can see that C-3PO was knocked over. This scene never made it into the film, but was on trading cards. Now we come to yet another special edition moment, and this was when I got frustrated in the theater in 1997. A mysterious maw, which you rot in until you presumably starve to death or run out of oxygen, or an earthworm with a mouth coming out of it. Which is more ominous? I do appreciate how they tried to correct this continuity in Book of Boba Fett, but the show was so unintelligent that it didn't warm me to the retcon. Another great nod to Empire is when Bossk shows up on Jabba's sail barge. The Wookiee-hating bounty hunter can be seen to the right of Jabba as he is ready to hear pleas for mercy. It is a blink or you'll miss it moment. Now that R2 is on the deck, we have to address the plan for the last time. So according to the film, the goal is for everyone to get captured with the exception of Lando, and Leia was to free Han from his carbonite. Luke would then arrive, hoping that no one is killed or tortured to death, and his goal was to piss Jabba off enough that he would sentence them all to death at the Sarlacc, which may be a well-known activity of Jabba on the planet. But to hope that the Hutt would assign R2 to the barge and the droid is free to go wherever, and that Leia is captured and tied to Jabba, and that Han and Chewie would be Sarlacc food with Luke, rather than some other fate, stretches credulity. I'm sure some absolutist out there will say, well, Luke saw the future. And that's all fine and dandy if that's the way you want to look at it. I myself love this movie. By me questioning these things doesn't mean I'm attacking the movie, I'm debating it. So yeah, I don't see Luke seeing the future, as well as the Emperor does, as the reason why this plan was made the way it is. It means that Jabba would have to do everything Luke wanted and was completely predictable. It's a good thing Ula died when she did too. As an 11-year-old, I thought the first act was perfection, which is a testament to the beauty of these films for kids. But the more I learned about storytelling, the harder time I had with this section of the film. That's not to say I can't enjoy watching it, but I wouldn't be fair if I didn't point this stuff out. Also, Some could argue that it's supposed to harken back to Flash Gordon's serials, which made less sense. However, the first 2 films are the standard of Star Wars, and they are very believable. Thus, Jedi falls short to said standard. Then we come to Boba Fett, which I was never a follower of. Sure, I liked him, but I wasn't gaga for him like so many fans in the past. I was frustrated in the special edition when they kept shoving him in your face constantly, because it destroyed his mystique, as less is more for villains. However, the way he died was laughable, and I remember when I was young, in the theater, my 11-year-old self said out loud, "See, he isn't tougher than IG-88 or Zuckuss," and I still stand by that today, especially after the Book of Boba Fett turned the character into a poor tactician who is not only weak, but full of folly. Now, a very subtle detail in the film is when a blast hits the skiff, and Chewie is hurt by it. You can see Chewbacca rocking his leg and Han saying, "Are you okay?" During the upcoming deleted sandstorm scene, you can see Chewie's leg wrapped. As Jabba is choking for dear life, notice that no one is helping him. He was not liked by the majority of his court, and the panic on the barge was immense. I want to note that Luke is the most wanted man in the galaxy at the moment. Leia was hugely wanted as well, because they were critical leaders of the rebellion, and it was no secret to the galaxy. This is not only evident to any fans of the film, but to the many bounty hunters who work in Jabba's court. If I was on this barge, and I knew that the 2 big leaders of the rebellion that were wanted most by the Empire were out in the middle of a desert, it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine that the rebellion wasn't far behind them. So Jabba going out in the middle of the desert at this time with these 2 people was just insane. I'd be scared to death to be on that barge. With that in mind, when you see all the denizens running around in panic and no one is helping Jabba, it makes sense. It's time to cover the sandstorm scene, and it is the very first day of shooting when this deleted scene was made. The scene doesn't really show much except Han's appreciation towards Luke and that he owes him one. I like the scene, but I can see why it was removed. Later, from 2008 to 2012, figures would be made for this deleted scene, and they are pretty cool and a nice find. Another deleted scene that I'm glad is not in the film is when Darth Vader and Jar Jar are marching towards the Emperor's arrival in preparation. This serves no purpose, and is just pageantry. I cannot imagine anyone else playing the Emperor, and truthfully, my favorite performance in the film after Mark Hamill is Ian as the Emperor. He is so good at the part, and I was overjoyed that he continued this role in the prequels. Another thing to note is that my favorite costume in the classic trilogy is the Emperor Royal Guard, as I had one of those costumes during the early 2000s. I love that getup, and I miss owning it very much. Now, whether you love or hate the prequel trilogy, they are so relevant to this film. Both Yoda and Ben are from an era where attachment was forbidden, and it was the very thing that created Darth Vader. Palpatine merely gave Anakin a push after the Jedi ostracized him, like they did Qui-Gon. If you don't know what I mean here, go back to my prequel coverage. The point is, they only see the possibility of Luke killing Vader, and his attachment is his weakness, which actually was in deleted dialogue that didn't make it into the film, proving the point further.
Obi-Wan would have told you long ago, had I let him. Now, a great weakness you carry. Fear for you I do.
Now, this may ruffle some fan feathers, but I always saw Yoda and Ben in the classic trilogy, even as a kid, as managers setting up a prize boxer for a fight, regardless of the means to achieve victory. Luke was a tool to them, and they never cared if he knew the truth about Vader. Yoda even states that it was unfortunate he learned the truth before he died, which is pretty callous. Just imagine if Luke didn't know Vader was his father, killed him, and then found out. Wouldn't that shatter Luke's view of the Jedi and possibly turn him after the fact due to resentment? And if not, what would that do to his outlook? Because of these obvious ramifications, it was clear that the end goal was all that mattered to Yoda and Ben, no matter what. Now, I don't see Yoda and Ben as bad guys, far from it. I'm just saying they suffer from the same methodology they used in the prequels. Luke's attachment is not a weakness. It is the salvation of the Jedi and ushers in the right era that Qui-Gon tried to begin during Episode 1, but he was rejected. This is one of the reasons the Book of Boba Fett with Luke is so offensive. Luke tries to force no attachment on Grogu when it was his attachment that saved Vader and was supposed to set things right. Luke is not of the mindset of the old vanguard. He is a new hope for the Jedi, and writers of these episodes have no understanding of what Luke is as a Jedi. Ben and Yoda simply don't understand attachment. They never had it. Luke did, and he needs it. Otherwise, he would never have gone after Han the way he did. Sadly, the Dagobah scenes show us that Ben and Yoda don't fully trust the Force like they say they do. Their minds are still a bit closed, and they lack faith in the Force like Qui-Gon preached and Luke practices. Otherwise, they would not see just one option, which is killing Vader. A nice continuity to Empire Strikes Back is two familiar droids in the Rebel briefing. When the command team enters the briefing, FX-7 can be seen on the left, while the medical droid 21B can be seen sitting behind Lando a bit later. More nice returns is Dennis Lawson as Wedge. This is his third stint as the pilot, and once again, he would survive another Death Star battle. Next to him is Nien Nunb, who is actually a B-Wing pilot. Later, we will see Nien Nunb in a different outfit, after Lando would make him the co-pilot for the Falcon. Again, I need to repeat that the costume designs in this film are my favorite of all the classic trilogy. I've already noted that the Royal Guards were my favorite costumes, but Lando's general outfit was always a big deal for me, especially because I love the character so much. I thought it looked so cool. There was more deleted footage with Lando during these scenes, where Luke and Chewbacca said goodbye. What we got in the film was the best, though.
Okay.
Lando!
The Force be with you.
Good luck to you.
Thanks. See you up there.
Right.
The Imperial dignitaries are the last remnant of the old Senate. They are nothing more than galactic politicians trying to gain or maintain power by sucking up to Palpatine. I find it no surprise that they all look old and vain, as they are so near to the Emperor. They are interesting characters for further world building, but it would have been nice to see some of that world building in detail. Now that the heroes have landed on Endor, we see rebel commandos, and one of them is this character who was known as Nik Sant since the 90s. This character can be noticed off and on in upcoming scenes, and would take on the disguise of an Imperial biker scout later in the film. You can see him in his biker scout disguise later, and we will point it out when it happens. Nik appeared as a figure in the Legacy Battle Pack in 2008 and became a sideshow figure as well in 2007. Another version would appear in 2023 in the Vintage Collection. When Disney took over, Dave Filoni wanted to appropriate this character for his designs and claimed that he was no longer Nik Sant, but Captain Rex, or maybe an alias of Captain Rex. Rex was Anakin's clone who resisted Order 66 in the Clone Wars cartoon and would later help the Rebels in the animated show Rebels. In the end, it's up to you to decide what canon you are loyal to where this character is concerned. It is at this scene that we begin to see Han is a different character. Unlike his wisecracking, cynical self, he is now optimistic and plucky. He shows this with this line.
Hey, it's me.
And then he blunders the ambush. And then he continues to be funny by twisting around to get Luke's saber in the net, then trying to blow out the torches vainly by blowing on them. Then telling 3PO to hurry up while interrupting him.
We need some fresh supplies too. Try and get our weapons back. Hurry up, will you? I haven't got all day.
During these moments, as a fan of this character, I realized he was not like his old self. This could be debated as a character arc. However, I don't remember this character's depth as only comic relief or outwardly affectionate to Leia, but in this film, these traits are full force, so to speak. As a result, he always seemed off to me. Now, I know a lot of fans out there, and the novel attests that Han was trapped in carbonite and was basically trapped in a living hell with memories, and being free, it changed who he was. And that makes sense. But still, the character was just a little too comical in this film for me to relate to. I still love the character despite this, but it stands out very much in this film, and it can be distracting at times. I would be interested in how you all view him in the comments. During 1983, the speeder bike sequence was cool as heck, and most of us kids got on our bikes pretending to be on speeder bikes as we raced down roadways or sidewalks. The way these bikes were filmed was very innovative and still holds up today. The only scene where Moff Jerjerrod showed backbone was when he refused Vader access to the Emperor. At first, Vader is annoyed, but Jerjerrod states that it is the Emperor's wishes, and the Dark Lord quickly ceases his assault, realizing he is out of line. This is just another example that Vader only kills when he has to. If he was so hell-bent on killing subordinates, as some ignorant theorists suggest, Jerjerrod would not have survived this encounter. For more depth to understand Vader's treatment towards Imperials, see my Star Wars video for the breakdown of his methodology. Having the biker scouts using distraction tactics to sneak up on Leia continued the idea that these guys were elite and tactical, and that the Empire was a serious threat. However, they are about to be made fools of later in the film. After waiting to see the Emperor, Darth tells his master about his son on the planet. It's interesting that the Emperor doesn't sense Luke, but it makes sense because Vader has a connection to his son. Having the Emperor question Vader's perspective on the matter is also very intelligent writing to foreshadow upcoming events. One of the things not laid out in the film is the Ewok hierarchy and how it works. Though the film is not clear about it, this is one of those few things I will note, as it does help stomach the Ewoks when watching it in retrospect as an adult. An interesting dynamic is the medicine man Logray and Chief Chirpa. Chirpa has actually led the Ewoks for 42 seasons, but he is getting a bit senile. With the arrival of the Empire, the forest has been exploited by the Imperials in their mechanical constructions, and many wildlife has been affected, disrupting Ewok hunts. Logray is an opportunistic, egotistical medicine man looking for power over his fellow Ewoks. Logray actually tried to encourage dark rituals like sacrifices amongst the Ewoks, like roasting captives such as Han and Luke. Logray's pride is evident when he ignores C-3PO, who is supposed to be a god. And then, during C-3PO's tale, you can see Logray hovering over Chirpa, trying to influence him. It is the Ewok Paplu, who is a warrior in the tribe, that addresses the Ewoks to support the rebels, and Logray quickly pivots to support the strangers to save face and announce they are part of the tribe. After the Battle of Endor, Logray would be ousted from the Ewok village and labeled a coward and bully. Paplo would become the new medicine man. An interesting thing about all this is that most Ewoks who were followers of Logray can be noticed because they have bones on their outfits, like Tebow, who was Logray's lieutenant. And there are few of them because many think Logray is problematic for their way of life. Most Ewoks don't take pride in adorning themselves with bones. Another interesting thing to note is that Wicket is the largest opponent of Logray, and because of that, Wicket rarely stays in the village. This is why he was out in the woods and found Leia as he was wandering to avoid conflicts with other Ewoks loyal to Logray. I just mention this because it's very interesting stuff, and it adds needed depth to what would otherwise be bland teddy bears that conveniently oust the Empire. You can find these details in any publication pre-Disney or fan sites, and Lucasfilm has always fleshed out every bit part character in the classic and prequel films. The problem is you just can't be told these things in films due to pacing. However, if you watch the film knowing this stuff, it makes the Ewoks a little more palatable nonetheless, which is why I mention it. Moving on, when Wicket hugs Han's leg, this is Harrison Ford's non-scripted reaction. There was a scene where, purring like a cat, I hug Han Solo's leg while C-3PO tells the stories around the campfire. The look of surprise and then resignation on Harrison's face wasn't acted. Now, a funny story behind the scenes was the cast of Ewoks. Little people are known as partying hard when they get together. Ian Bryce was responsible for ferrying the troop to and from the set. One day he got on the bus and not one Ewok cast member was aboard. Then he found a note that said, "Ian, we went to the airport. We've had it. We've had enough and we're leaving." Now, Ian was young and career-minded at that time and went into a panic, heading towards the airport, but his tire went flat not far from the location. Then he got on the Ewok bus, but it broke down. Suddenly, over the walkie, he heard Ewoks chuckling, and it was discovered that the entire cast of Ewoks arrived on set earlier to play this prank and were hiding. When Ian walked back to the set, the Ewok cast had t-shirts on, which said, "Revenge of the Ewoks." Now, Leia being Luke's sister was never the plan before 1980. The first draft of Jedi always had this in it, no doubt. This was Lucas not wanting to keep making Star Wars films in the future. I understand why he did it, but I would have been very happy if the other was never revealed in this trilogy for ambiguity. I think it awfully convenient Leia is his sister, but I accept it without complaint. When Leia recalls her mother, it really doesn't make sense considering what we saw in the prequel trilogy. They really rushed Padme's death and needed to flesh it out more to make Leia's recollection connect to what we saw. Padme should not have died in childbirth. She should have survived for a time on Alderaan depressed, in my opinion, to force the tragedy of Vader more, while Luke somehow was separated from her and was in Ben's hands. That's my fanboy take anyways. In this scene, Leia begins to show that she's a bit different from her normal character too. Instead of just telling Han, she doesn't communicate, which is not her style, and Han timidly apologizes. When Luke is brought to Vader, Luke refers to Vader as Father only, thus showing reverence and at the same time love, which has been a foreign concept to Anakin since the death of Padme. Had Luke stonewalled just a little bit, it is doubtful he could have turned Vader, but because he presents himself as a respectful son and believes in his father, Luke connects with his dad greatly. Now, the prequels really flesh out Anakin and tie into Jedi greatly. We have covered in other videos how Vader fit into the Empire and his creation, but you must remember that Vader sees the Jedi as traitors and a group that is lost. Obviously, he's misguided, but he thinks he's the good guy. And I'm not going to cover why he is this way because I covered it in other videos. At this moment, his son has been tainted by Jedi teaching, who Vader sees as villains. Taking Luke to the Emperor is a logical step because together they have a better chance of turning Luke than Vader going at it alone. Palpatine has been like a father figure to Vader since he was a boy, and 20 plus years later, Vader is still at his side. Luke is a temptation to have ambition for Vader, but taking Luke to the Emperor is basically trying to straighten this kid out, who has been polluted by misguided Jedi teachings. At this moment, I believe Vader is still loyal to Palpatine, and he even says so.
I must obey my master.
Despite this, you can begin to see cracks in Vader's resolve in this scene as well. But since I don't think my opinion is absolute, I am open for debate. After Poplu and Wicket take it upon themselves to plan a distraction for the guards, Han does some distracting of his own. What's funny is I always wondered why the scout just didn't blast Han rather than chase him. As a kid, I had a biker scout figure in 1983 and noticed that his gun was holstered on his boot. Maybe that's why he didn't quickly draw his sidearm. That's just me musing. Now, a very subtle blink and you'll miss it moment is Nik Sant taking his post in disguise outside the bunker. You can see him fidgeting with his helmet if you look close and then standing at attention behind the troopers. There was footage of him outside the bunker in this getup with Han and the team before they entered, but it never made it into the film. In the scene where Luke and the Emperor first clash with words, it's magnificent dialogue and writing. What makes it so good is the tension is a test of wills and words, and not many movies can achieve such quality. The stakes are souls, Luke or his father, and that can be worse than death. Rather than say anything else, I would rather tout the film's dialogue and performances for themselves.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Your faith in your friends is yours.
Now, the invasion of the shield generator was much longer before it was cut down. It showed a shootout between troopers and the rebels, and then Han and Leia blowing the door open. There was some minuscule dialogue tweaks, but nothing that would have made the film better. During the bunker scene, Barry Holland, who played the Imperial commander, recalled a funny story between him and Harrison Ford when he called Han,
"You rebel scum."
In the rehearsal, Harrison Ford looked at him funny and responded, "What did you call me?" and then playfully fake slapped him in the face. They must have liked this exchange because they would later film a similar exchange in the film, but gladly it was left out because I thought Han had done enough humor at this point in the movie for my tastes.
Scum?
The space battle in Return of the Jedi is the best of all Star Wars films in my opinion. Yes, I like it more than Revenge of the Sith as well. I don't think this dated at all, and the tension of this battle combined with what is going on with Luke and the Sith is unmatched in any Star Wars film to date. These two story threads in the third act of the film really makes Jedi a worthy conclusion to the classic trilogy. As for the Battle of Endor, well, we're getting to it. For now, just soak in scenes like this. Now, there were multiple characters filmed for the pilots of the rebel ships. The variety included 2 women, a Celestian, a Mon Calamari, and there were a few jokes put into the dialogue.
Fried calamari tonight.
Fried calamari tonight.
The actors would be fed lines and then they repeated them, sometimes not knowing it was a joke.
This is the last time I fly Lucas Air.
This is the last time I fly Lucas Air. Prepare for Marin takeoff.
These scenes were not necessary, but are interesting. I'm actually glad some of the scenes didn't make it into the film because some of the deliveries are just bad.
I'm hit!
It's your left power supply.
It's my left power supply.
Got it.
Got it.
There were also more deleted scenes, which was on the Millennium Falcon, showing various techs tending to the Falcon during the battle. It also harkened back to the 1977 Star Wars film by showing Colonel Kraken using the gunner stations in the Falcon. Again, these scenes were not needed, but they're interesting. During production, there was some concern that the Ackbar costume would not work, and as a result, they filmed Dermot Crowley as General Crix Maydean to fill in if the character didn't work. To be honest, I like the scenes with Maydean, but I actually think Ackbar shows much more passion and life. There were only 2 moments in the Maydean scene that got my attention. The first was when Marquand yelled at actors for acting before their cues.
Flash, stagger! Don't stagger until I tell you! Keep flying.
The other was when the Star Destroyer Executor went down and Maydean and his crew cheered.
The big flash. And a cheer!
On a side note, Dermot arrived on the set of Jedi smooth-faced, but because Kenner made the figure of him with a beard, and it was in production, they gave him a fake beard. In some of these shots, he does look like a regular bearded G.I. Joe doll from the 60s and 70s. Now we come to the Battle of Endor, and there is really not much to say except it's completely unbelievable that the Ewoks ever had a chance against battalions of Imperials. When arrows are fired at stormtroopers and biker scouts, it looks possible, but when you realize stormtroopers have full body armor, it's kind of unbelievable that they would have any effect. What's worse is stormtroopers charge towards Ewoks as they are clearly obstructed in brush. Are you telling me they wouldn't use their weapons to shoot in said area instead? And the only reason Han, Leia, and the rebels survive this melee by the bunker is because Imperials are not shooting them. You can see in many shots Imperials just standing around, looking around, and not even using their weapons. For a perfect example of how ludicrous this battle is, you only need to see Ewoks flying in their gliders with 2 stones as their armaments. Think of the time it would take for said Ewok to land, get more stones, and then get back in the battle. It is totally ineffective. And if you muse about the logistics of this battle, it will fry your brain. You're telling me that the Ewoks knew exactly where to put trip cords so speeder bikes would go through them perfectly. How convenient. Fans will argue that the log setup are for fighting the Goraxes, which, great, sure. I can buy the Ewok movies as canon, I guess, but how convenient that it was set up so perfectly that it could be used against Scout Walkers so effectively. Look at these logs. They were hoisted up in trees and placed perfectly to smash this AT-ST at just the right second. And by the way, where are the AT-AT walkers? Because we know they patrol this area as previous scenes set up. It is just absurd, and the truth of what the battle would look like is this. I appreciate that these moments are in the film, but there's not enough of them, and in the end we all know this is what the battle would have looked like. The conveniences of Jabba's palace and this battle really scars this film in the long run. Now, take a moment to remember that this film has deep emotions for me as an 11-year-old and impact me today. I'm not hating on it. We have to be honest with what is in it, and it just doesn't stack up to the earlier 2 film standards when looking at it objectively. Now, Harrison Ford's performance is either over the top or on autopilot, and Leia is very different. And sadly, we know Ford didn't take the role seriously in this movie because he referred to his character as Ham Yoyo. Now, there is a deleted sequence that would have carried on for the rest of the film, and it covered Moff Jerjerrod. Before Luke draws his saber, Palpatine would give specific instructions to Jerjerrod to blow up Endor if the shield generator was disabled, to which Jerjerrod would respond,
"Yes, Your Highness. But we have several battalions stationed on the moon."
"You will destroy it."
"Yes, Your Highness."
However, we should also note that if they fired at Endor and destroyed it, the proximity of the Death Star to the planet would only mean that the Death Star would be destroyed as well. And that might be one of the reasons why they cut this from the film. We would have then returned to the film proper, where Vader shows his loyalty to Palps. Otherwise, he would have let Luke kill him. As I said before, he wants to turn Luke away from the misguided teachings of the Jedi, and he thinks the Emperor can help him. After all, he's been loyal to him for over 20 years. We would then return to the Jerjerrod sequence, where the dish has just been destroyed. In response, he orders the Death Star to be turned on Endor.
"Sir, the deflector shield is down, and we've lost all contact with the generating station."
"Position the station to blow up the moon."
The fight between Vader and Luke in Return of the Jedi was and is, for me both as a boy and an adult, the pinnacle of Star Wars. It is the most memorable fight both for its relevance and tension. No other fight in all of Star Wars matches the confrontation in Jedi for me. There is just so much behind it, and in credit to Marquand, its timing and performances are superb. It is when Luke and Darth fight for round 2 that the soundtrack for Return of the Jedi needs to be brought up. The final duel theme can often bring tears to my eyes when I hear it. It is a powerful track, and there are many others in this soundtrack. But like the movie itself, the soundtrack suffers the same problems the film does. I say this because I was disappointed in this soundtrack. Now I am speaking about the full 2-disc soundtrack with every track of the film. Regularly, I put in Star Wars, Empire, Phantom Menace without skipping a single track during car drives. But when I listen to Return of the Jedi, which is at least once a year in my car, especially on long trips, I rarely, if ever, listen to Disc 1 and find myself skipping Ewok themes. Overall, it just doesn't stack up to the first 2 films and Phantom Menace scores. The irony is that the final duel is on my top 3 Star Wars tracks spanning all the films ever made. I am actually curious if many of you share this outlook or disagree with me, so post in the comments. Hamill's eyes is what sells this encounter. His emoting is dead on, and it makes everything believable. When he beats his father, you can see he's loving it, and when he hears the laughter, it's hard to know if Luke was going to finish his father or retract by himself. When he notices his hand, he realizes he is becoming what he is fighting, and he remembers who he should be, and it's in his facial expressions that we know this. He knows what the Emperor says is true. His hate has made him powerful, and thus he catches his breath and remembers that he does not need his weapon, and this returns to the lesson Yoda gave him in the cave. Now I want to take a moment to remind everyone that in the first Star Wars, Luke was so interested in anything having to do with his father, and it was what drove him to the Force. Thus, Luke has been chasing his father and wanting to be like him since the 1977 film.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
This line has great meaning here. The reverence towards his father is clear, and he's willing to die for it. In Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, the son emulates the father by becoming a Jedi. By the end of Jedi, the father emulates the son to become like him. The Emperor does not mess around with Luke, and there is nothing he has learned Force-wise to stop the Emperor's onslaught. So he calls out his father, and this is because he has faith in his father. In the Lucas trilogy, we always come back to faith. And if you don't recognize this in the classic trilogy, the prequels can be very hard to like or quantify. For my personal view, I believe Vader wanted to straighten his son out. And the moment Palpatine said,
"And take your father's place at my side,"
it quickly dawned upon him that his whole life has been spoiled by the lie that Palpatine cared for him like a father, and that Vader's true family was what really mattered. Vader turns to the dark side to protect his familial bonds with Padme. His obsession to keep her safe is his downfall. In Jedi, his desire to protect Luke is his salvation. The culmination of all of this is that when the Emperor is killed, a Jedi has returned. Now we return to the Jar Jar deleted sequence as the Strike Force enters the superstructure of the Death Star. The Moff would give orders which were basically countermeasures.
Rebel fighters have entered the superstructure.
Open the power discharge gates. Flood sectors 304 and 138. I just slow them up a bit.
At the end of the film, Endor still exists only because the Moff was indecisive. Because when it came time to fire, he hesitated, and then the Death Star would blow up.
Moon target in range. Sir, moon target in range now.
Commence firing.
Within a few seconds of the order, the Death Star would explode. Although I like the new score for the Ewok Celebration, I prefer the classic Ewok Celebration theme, and I prefer the ending without a bunch of worlds cheering because the celebration gives a more personal touch for the victors in this film. I understand there is a whole galaxy out there, but we went on a journey with these characters in this film, and I think it is more appropriate to celebrate with them at the end of the film rather than an entire galaxy of strangers. Thus, I see the classic version as more intimate in its approach. Now, in the modern versions of Return of the Jedi, whether Blu-ray or DVD, Hayden Christensen appears as a Force ghost, and I do not accept this. Even though I try to respect the creator's choices in films, Sebastian Shaw was always the image that makes sense. After all, Ben is not Ewan McGregor. And at the time Darth redeemed himself, he was old, so why would he revert back to youth when he was corrupted? Jake Lloyd would have been a better apparition than Hayden, because at the time Anakin was pure and good. Originally, only Ben and Yoda would be spirits at the end of the film, and when they decided to put Shaw in during a pickup shot, Kazanjian had his doubts, and in a prolific moment, he argued with Lucas about the decision. I had started thinking about it, and I said to George, why? This guy, he's like Hitler. He's killed, he's done all these terrible things, and now we're saying he's equal with Yoda and Obi-Wan, as if he's gone to heaven or whatever. And George Lucas pointed at me. He was real close, and he says, isn't that what your religion is all about? And boy, that was like being slapped on the side of the face, because yes, it is what my religion is all about, and obviously his, but I hadn't thought it through. There are a lot of things to love in Jedi. Jabba's palace is just one of the coolest environments in Star Wars, and the final fleet battle is breathtaking. And then, of course, there's the showdown with Darth, Luke, and the Emperor. The duel conflict is just amazing storytelling, and it is the thing that holds up Return of the Jedi. Without it in the movie, it would be very disappointing. Multiple critics and fans cite Return of the Jedi as their favorite of the classic trilogy, and I would bet that most of them would say one of the main reasons is the Vader-Luke dynamic and the confrontation as the reason why. Unfortunately, despite my tremendously powerful emotions when it comes to this movie, I cannot join that group. I rank Return of the Jedi as my least favorite of the three classic films, but I revere it nonetheless as a staple in my movie-going life. As the saga ended in theaters, it began on television and VHS to keep the magic alive. Though they fought hard to get the rights to air the sequel sooner on television, 20th Century Fox did the opposite. Star Wars had already aired on pay-per-view in September 1982 and would land on HBO during the winter of 1983. It was released on VHS in May 1982, right at the date Fox negotiated. The film would finally be shown on CBS on Sunday, February 26, 1984, from 8 to 11 p.m. with a 22-minute making-of feature included, which was hosted by Mark Hamill.
You are about to become part of the phenomena of Star Wars. In a few minutes, you'll see a movie that's become more than just a movie.
In November 1984, The Empire Strikes Back would land on VHS. It would eventually end up on television on NBC on Sunday, November 22, 1987. Way past holdback deadlines. Jedi would land on VHS in February 1986 and would also air on NBC on Sunday, March 19, 1989. Unlike the first two Star Wars films that had a presence for years to come, Jedi seemed to disappear from the zeitgeist within a year. All the kids were into G.I. Joe now, and those that were not were getting into He-Man. In my neighborhood in Toledo, Ohio, most of my friends completely ignored the second wave of Jedi stuff in 1984. I found myself with only one friend that was still into Star Wars by the time Transformers were becoming the rage. And within a year, Kenner released their final wave of Power of the Force figures, which no one bought, and they ended up in clearance bins. Later, these figures would skyrocket in value and are worth a small fortune today. In the 80s, toys were huge and creative, and kids treated Star Wars like it was old news by 1985. Many kids grew into their teens during the mid to late 80s, and I was one of them. Though we said goodbye to toys, we always remembered them. And Star Wars seemed to be that discussion we had of the good old days, along with G.I. Joe, He-Man, and Transformers. It would stay that way for many years, until new adventures with Han, Luke, and Leia would reignite our memories and light a fire under the fan base that would result in the reimagining of figures in 1995, and The films would return in 1997 and would pave the way to the prequels. But that's best left for another video series. For now, this ends our Return of the Jedi coverage, and we really thank you for being here. And as you leave, we can't help but just say,
May the Force be with you.
and if you really like this video, consider helping us on Patreon, where $3 a month will give you early access to our videos weekly. And if you're part of our Patreon already, we really thank you and appreciate you. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, and so does sharing.